There comes a moment when your silence speaks louder than any words you could ever say. The day you stop chasing, the day you stop proving, is the day she begins to feel something she never did before: your absence. Detachment isn't about anger or resentment, it's about taking back your energy, your peace, and your self respect. You stop feeding the connection that only you were holding together. You stop trying to fix what was never meant to be one sided. And in that quiet withdrawal, something powerful happens. She begins to notice, she begins to see what you carried, what you gave, and how much of yourself you offered while expecting nothing in return. At first, she doesn't understand it. She might even think you've lost interest or moved on. But beneath that surface, confusion begins to rise. She remembers the way you cared, the consistency you showed, and the calmness you brought to her chaotic emotions. Now that energy is gone, and when it's gone, it hits differently. You see, people only realize value when something they took for granted is no longer available. Your detachment becomes the mirror that shows her the reality she didn't want to face, that your presence was never ordinary, it was rare. The irony is, when you were trying, it made her feel secure enough to overlook your worth. You were too predictable, too available, and in her mind, that made you less of a challenge, less of a mystery. But when you pull back, when your attention no longer revolves around her, she starts to feel the shift. It's not that she suddenly changes overnight, but deep down, she senses that the emotional control has moved into your hands. You're no longer reacting, you're simply existing in peace. That balance, that indifference becomes magnetic. A man who is detached is not cold hearted. He simply understands that love without self respect is weakness. When you let go of trying to make her see your value, you're actually teaching her the greatest lesson. Your worth doesn't depend on her recognition. You don't need her approval to validate your existence. That's the moment your power returns to you. It's no longer about winning her back or proving your loyalty. It's about standing in your own truth and allowing things to fall into place naturally. When you detach, the energy you used to spend on her now goes toward your purpose, your growth, your peace. That energy shift creates an aura around you, a calm confidence that doesn't need validation, and that's what she begins to miss the most. She misses how grounded you were, how you brought stability to her storms, and how she felt safe in your presence even when she didn't admit it. Eventually, she'll come to realize that your detachment wasn't punishment, it was a reflection of self worth. You didn't walk away to hurt her, you walked away to heal yourself. And in doing so, you became exactly what she needed but never appreciated when she had you. That's the silent truth of detachment. It reveals who you are and reminds her what she lost forever. When you stop trying, something shifts not only in her but within you. You begin to see the difference between love that's mutual and love that's forced. All that effort you once poured into making her see your worth starts to feel unnecessary because deep down, you realize your value doesn't depend on anyone's recognition. You've done enough, given enough, and waited long enough. The moment you step back, the world seems quieter, but it's in that silence that you start hearing your own voice again. The energy that was once spent chasing validation now turns inward, fueling your growth, clarity, and strength. Women often test the boundaries of emotional energy. They want to see how far you'll go, how much of yourself you give before you realize you've given too much. When you stop trying, it's not about playing games, it's about balance. You stop being the one who overextends and instead you allow the natural rhythm of connection to play out. She starts to feel that void, the absence of your messages, your calls, your effort, and that's when curiosity begins to take over. What happened to the man who was always there? What made him stop? That's the seed of realization you unknowingly plant through your silence. When you were always trying, she never had to question anything. She knew your attention was guaranteed, your presence was predictable. But when that constant energy fades, it creates uncertainty. Suddenly, she begins to overthink, to reflect on what changed. And that reflection leads her back to you, not because you begged for attention, but because you withdrew it with dignity. Your detachment reminds her that you were never desperate, you were simply genuine, you cared deeply, but you weren't going to lose yourself trying to convince someone else to see it. There's power in restraint. It's one of the hardest yet most liberating decisions you can make: to care without chasing, to love without losing your peace. When she feels that shift, she might interpret it as you becoming distant or cold. But in reality, you're just grounded now. You're centered. You're no longer reacting to her emotions, but instead choosing your peace over chaos. That's what makes her wonder. That's what makes her start to feel your absence in ways she didn't before. As you evolve through this detachment, you also begin to see her differently. You start to understand that love built on effort alone will never be sustainable. It has to be reciprocal, it has to flow naturally. Your stillness becomes your greatest lesson and your greatest strength. You begin to focus on your path, your growth, and the kind of energy you want to share moving forward. And that's when the tables turn. The same woman who once felt in control now starts to realize what she's lost. She remembers your calmness, your loyalty, your effort, and regrets taking it for granted. You didn't stop trying to hurt her. You stopped trying because you finally understood that true connection doesn't require constant convincing. It thrives on respect, not pursuit. When you stop trying, you trigger a shift in the energy dynamic between you and her. At first, she might think your silence means nothing. She assumes it's just another phase that you'll eventually come back like you always do. But as days turn into weeks, something different begins to stir in her mind. The attention she used to take for granted starts to fade, and the comfort of your presence slowly disappears. It's only then that she begins to feel the emptiness that your absence leaves behind. This emptiness becomes a mirror reflecting the value of what she lost, your consistency, your patience, your quiet care. All those things she once overlooked now stand out in her memory. Women often connect emotionally before they even realize it consciously. When you were always around, she didn't have to face those emotions deeply. You made her feel seen, valued, and secure, but she didn't fully appreciate it because she never had to experience life without it. When you pull back, her subconscious begins to recognize that emotional dependency. It's not about missing the messages or the calls, it's about missing the feeling of being genuinely cared for. The emotional void you leave behind reminds her that your presence had meaning far beyond words. The more she tries to ignore the feeling, the stronger it becomes. She might distract herself, talk to others, or convince herself she doesn't care, but every attempt to replace you only amplifies the contrast between what she had and what she's finding now. She begins to notice that no one else listens quite like you did. No one gives her that sense of calm or emotional grounding. It's subtle at first, but it grows piece by piece until she can no longer deny that what she lost was rare. That's the power of genuine connection. It leaves an imprint that time and distance can't easily erase. Your silence also creates space for her to confront her own behavior. She starts to question why you stopped trying, what caused the shift. Maybe she realizes she was too focused on herself, too dismissive of your effort. Maybe she recognizes that she pushed away someone who was real in a world full of people pretending to care. That's when guilt and regret begin to mix with longing, and it's not about manipulation or revenge, it's about balance. The universe always finds a way to remind people of what they've taken for granted. But what's truly powerful here is that your focus isn't on making her miss you, it's on reclaiming your peace. You've accepted that your energy is valuable and deserves to be met with appreciation. That realization alone changes everything. Because when you stop trying, you're not losing something, you're gaining yourself again. You no longer chase love, you embody it. You no longer seek validation, you live with self respect. And that's when she finally sees it, the man who no longer needs to prove his worth, the man who was always enough but had to step back for her to realize it. Then, when you stop chasing and finally step back, something profound begins to happen. Not just in her, but within you. The space you once filled with effort, thoughts, and emotions directed toward her slowly transforms into clarity. You start to see things from a distance that were clouded when you were emotionally involved. You notice how much energy you were giving, how much of yourself you were pouring into proving your worth, and how much peace you were sacrificing just to be understood. That silence, what feels like emptiness at first, becomes a source of strength. You start realizing that peace is better than attention and self respect is more powerful than validation. For her, though, this shift feels unsettling. When you stop showing up, when your energy is no longer available on demand, she feels a disturbance she can't fully explain. At first, she might interpret your calmness as indifference, but as time passes, it begins to challenge her assumptions. She thought she held control over your emotions, that she could pull you close whenever she wanted. But your silence proves her wrong. It shows her that you were never dependent, you were choosing to be there, and that's what changes everything. Human nature craves what it can no longer easily access. When you stop trying, she starts remembering moments she ignored, messages she left unread, words you said that she brushed off. Slowly, they begin to replay in her mind, not as memories, but as reminders of your emotional presence. She begins to miss not just the attention, but the feeling of being safe and valued. The contrast between your presence and your absence becomes sharp, almost haunting. That's when curiosity turns into longing. She wonders what you're doing, who you're talking to, and why you seem unaffected. Meanwhile, your energy shifts toward growth. You begin focusing on your purpose, your goals, your inner calm. That quiet confidence becomes magnetic. The more you center yourself, the more she notices the difference. She starts to see the man who doesn't need her approval to feel complete, the man who isn't waiting for her to come back. Ironically, that's when attraction reignites, not from your effort, but from your indifference. You've stopped playing the emotional tug of war, and in doing so, you've removed her power to manipulate your peace. The truth is, absence reveals what presence could not. It's through your distance that she finally recognizes the depth of what she lost. You didn't disappear out of bitterness. You simply chose peace over drama, clarity over confusion. And as she watches you thrive without her, that realization begins to sting. She may try to come back to test if the door is still open, but by then, yen, you've grown so much that her approval no longer defines your worth. In the end, the silence that once felt heavy becomes your greatest ally. It teaches you patience, emotional control, and the beauty of detachment. Because when you stop chasing what isn't meant for you, you make space for what is. And that's when true power begins, not in her return, but in your peace. When you stop trying to convince her of your worth, a quiet transformation begins. The energy that once flowed outward toward her now starts to turn inward. And this shift changes everything. You begin to see that chasing, proving, and constantly trying to show your value was never the way to be respected. It was the way to be taken for granted. Because the truth is, people rarely appreciate what's always available. The more you try to win her attention, the more invisible you became. But when you stopped, when you simply pulled your energy back without anger or resentment, that absence started to speak louder than any words could. In that silence, she begins to feel something unfamiliar, your distance, not as punishment, but as peace. And peace has a strange power. It exposes the chaos she brought into your life. She starts to realize that your calmness is not weakness, it's control, it's emotional maturity. She begins to remember the times you were there without asking for anything in return, the patience you showed, the loyalty you offered. All of it starts to mean more now that it's gone. It's in your absence that your true presence starts to echo. You see, when you stop chasing someone, you stop feeding their ego. The validation they once received from your attention dries up. And for someone who was used to your energy, that void becomes impossible to ignore. It's not about revenge, it's about nature. Human psychology is wired to crave what feels scarce. When your energy was constantly available, it was easy to overlook. But the moment you withdraw it, you become rare, and rarity breeds value. She starts to miss not just your words, but the peace that came with your presence, the reliability, the safety, the quiet strength that she once took for granted. But the real power is not in her missing you, it's in your evolution. Because during that time apart, something inside you hardens in the best way. You stop needing external validation. You stop basing your happiness on whether she sees your worth. You become self sufficient, emotionally grounded, and detached in a way that radiates confidence. That's the kind of man who can't be manipulated because his peace doesn't depend on anyone else. And that's what she begins to crave most. The version of you who's no longer emotionally available at her command. She might try to test your resolve to see if you still feel the same, but this time you don't react, you respond, you don't seek, you select. That shift from emotional dependence to emotional control is what sets you free. It's what turns the dynamic completely around because now she's the one thinking, wondering, feeling uncertain, and you're the one at peace. In the end, when you stop trying to prove your worth, you stop losing yourself. You realize that love isn't something you earn by effort, it's something that flows naturally when it's real. And sometimes it's the moment you stop chasing that the world finally starts to come toward you. When you finally stop trying, something deep inside you awakens, a quiet power that had been buried under constant effort and emotional exhaustion. You realize that the more you try to make her see your worth, the further she drifted away. But when you walked away, not out of anger, but self respect, everything began to shift. The energy that was once spent chasing her approval now becomes fuel for your growth, your focus, your peace. You begin to understand that sometimes silence communicates what words never could. Your absence becomes the loudest statement of your value. At first, she might not notice. She might even believe you'll come back like you always did. But slowly, the silence starts to echo. She starts to notice the difference between your presence and the emptiness that replaced it. She remembers the small things, the calm in your voice, the reliability in your actions, the way you brought balance to her chaos. And that's when the regret sets in. Because once you stop trying, you stop being predictable. You're no longer the man she can manipulate with attention or guilt. You become something else entirely, a man in control of himself. When you stop chasing, you stop giving her power. You break the cycle of emotional dependency that once kept you stuck. It's in this stillness that your true transformation happens. You start investing in yourself, your purpose, your goals, your strength.